Hi everyone, it's been a while, but today we're back to talk about trauma responses beyond fight or flight, which are the ones that people are really common with. In this two-part mini-series, I'm going to be talking about the lesser-known trauma responses, which are freeze and fawn. Now, in 1914, a doctor called Walter Cannon came up with two things to do with acute stress response, and that was fight and flight. But it wasn't until decades later that it became known more to do with trauma responses. And so we have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and there is another one I've heard of called flop, which is kind of basically about fainting, to put it simply. But the two that I'm going to be concentrating on in this mini series is freeze and fawn. So today I'm going to be talking about freeze. When I first heard about freeze, I was actually really relieved, because all I'd ever heard about was, when it came to trauma, people fighting back against the trauma or people running away from the trauma. And I did neither. When I was experiencing the abuse, I didn't do anything, but I didn't know that there were words for that. So when I heard that freeze, which is what I did, which is what I used to do, that freeze was part of a trauma response, it was a relief. I felt like I could stop blaming myself a bit. It was the first stage of having a bit of compassion for ourselves and acknowledging what we did to survive. And if we freezed up and didn't fight back or didn't run away, that was what worked for us. It's what we did to survive. When it came to freezing up during the abuse, as an adult, I had a lot of self-blame, where the truth of the matter is, it was a perpetrator who should be blamed for what they did to us when we were children, really. And even when it happened when we were more grown up, when we were adults, and it was domestic violence from a partner, it still wasn't our fault. We didn't choose to hurt ourselves this way, to abuse ourselves this way. It's something that the perpetrator did, and that's where the blame should lie. But it's a very strong feeling, and it's something that I still have to deal with in the present day. Another part of the freeze feelings were powerlessness, and that powerlessness is actually a feature of abuse. I'm not going to say especially sexual abuse, but any kind of abuse. It's just a feeling of you can't do anything about it. Or, like what happened to us, we learned that if we did try to do something about it, things would be even worse for us. They may threaten us with escalating the abuse, or, which was more common, is that they would threaten somebody else, that if I didn't cooperate and be quiet and be still and let them abuse me, then they would go on to my younger brother or a family pet, that they would do something to them that would make me really regret what happened. And that was a terrible thing to do. But again, when I was little, there's not so much a 3-year-old child can do against a grown adult. And when I was older and the things were happening, I was so conditioned to respond this way. Sorry about the sirens outside. So powerlessness, it's a feeling that went along with the self-blame. There's actually a very good book called Unshame, and it's by Carolyn Spring, and I'll leave the details of that in in a description box. Carolyn Spring is a survivor of child sexual abuse as well, and deals with dissociation too. So going along with that, the shame of not doing anything when what we were doing was surviving, and that is valid, that is doing something. The feeling of being weak, appearing weak, no matter how big our size, it's something that has stayed with us through our whole life. But the weakness is something that perpetrators would zone in on, and it wasn't our weakness, it was our innocence. As someone from a survivors group once told me, that perpetrators, they are very, very good at spotting innocence, and innocence isn't the same as weakness. And the thing is, even if I had been weak, it's still not an excuse for people to take advantage of that. Just to end on the facts of my experiences with freeze, is that when I've spoken about this in the past, there's a lot of misunderstanding. There are people who may be well-intentioned, and they'll say, well, if I was in that situation, I would have punched that guy in the face. Or if I was in that situation, I would have told a grown-up. But when the abuse started for me, it was 1972. And if anyone's ever watched the series Life on Mars, that's an excellent description of how the world was in the UK for everybody. But when you were black, and the police were incredibly racist, when medical professionals were incredibly racist and didn't want to believe things like this happened, when teachers would look the other way when people came in with black eyes and bruises, things were very, very different. This was pre-internet. There wasn't anywhere I could sort of look up information and see that what was happening was wrong. There wasn't anybody else to talk to, because sadly, there was actually a few things. I didn't have the words for what was happening to me. I had no words that would describe rape or sexual abuse or physical abuse. I didn't have those words. I also experienced a lot of mutism. My voice just literally got beaten out of me. And one of my alter identities created their own kind of sign language to communicate with myself, because they had no words for a very long time. And the last thing, with just how things were in the past, but still are, to be really truthful, and that's respectability politics. And that's something that is very, very strong with a lot of working class, black, Asian, and I've seen it in some white working class people as well, of we don't want to look bad in front of other people, so we'll deny that abuse ever happens, that domestic violence ever happens. You know, we're better than that. Yeah, we're poor and, you know, we're downtrodden, but we have standards. We never do things like that. So they'll say that it never happened, and it does. And it doesn't help people who are in the middle of it. It doesn't help children who have to grow up with this. And so that feeling of powerlessness and of shame, that's what I felt for myself, but it's also what the world around me in the 1970s, right up to the 2000s, it's something that was incredibly strong and stopped me from seeking help, made me afraid to speak up. And yeah, that just added to the feelings that went along with freeze. This isn't happening to me. This is happening to someone else. And all of that also feeds into the dissociative identity disorder that I live with as well. Another identity could take the pain of the abuse that I went through. Another separate identity could take on what happened afterwards. It's a tricky one, but for me, just knowing that the freeze existed, that it wasn't me just being a weirdo, that it's a valid trauma response, that helped. And I hope it can help you who are watching now as well. So I'm going to record part 2, which will be about Fawn in a little while. But for now, thanks for watching and listening. I really appreciate all of you and the comments that you leave as well. So from all of me to all of you, bye.